the Greenbrier Ghost, Elva Zona Shue. Her life was stolen in a brutal act, her voice silenced, but from beyond the grave, Zona defied death to expose her murderer. This is a gripping tale of a mother's undying love and a restless spirit seeking vengeance. Welcome back to You Should Be Scared. I'm your host, Robbie Davis. Thanks for joining me this week for a tale that's stranger than fiction and spookier than your last blind date. But only just, let's be honest. Imagine a murder victim rising from the grave to seek their own justice. Sounds impossible, right? Well, gather round and turn down the lights. Tonight is a true crime episode. But this true crime has ghosts, murder, and a mother's love that transcends death. The story takes place in the late 1800s in Greenbrier County, West Virginia. Picture rolling hills, dense forests, and an eerie silence. Secrets whisper on the wind, and shadows hold their breath. A humble log cabin, home to Zona and Edward Shue. Elva Zona Heaster, who went by Zona, known for her gentle nature and kind soul. Erasmus Stripling Shue, who went by Edward, a brooding, handsome blacksmith. Their love story soon transformed into a tale of tragedy and terror. One crisp January afternoon, the peace of Greenbrier County was shattered. Edward asked a neighbour's young son to check on Zona, but this time something was different. He knocked on the sturdy wooden door. Silence. The door creaked open, inviting him inside. Zona lay at the foot of the stairs, eerily still. The young boy froze, his blood turning to ice. Terror lent speed to his feet as he fled the cabin. The news spread through the small community like wildfire. How and why? These questions hung heavy in the air. News of Zona's passing reached Edward. He returned home, a figure consumed by grief, or so it seemed. Edward dressed her in a high neck gown, its stiff collar reaching up to her chin, something that hinted at a darkness lurking beneath. About an hour later, Dr. Knapp arrived to examine Zona. Edward had moved her body upstairs onto the bed, washed her, and dressed her in the high-necked gown. Edward had also put a veil over her face. Edward sat by Zona's body, cradling her head and crying hysterically. This prevented Dr. Knapp from conducting a full examination. When Dr. Knapp tried to examine Zona's head, Edward became enraged and drove the doctor out of the house. Dr. Knapp attributed Edward's behaviour to grief. The doctor declared Zona's cause of death as an everlasting faint or heart attack. Later, he revised it to complications from childbirth. However, Zona hadn't told anyone she was pregnant, not even her mother. The funeral approached. Along with the collar and veil, Edward carefully draped a scarf over Zona's head and neck. It didn't match her burial dress at all, but Edward asserted it was her favourite. He even propped her head up, first with a pillow, then with a rolled-up cloth. This behaviour was very unusual, but most guests probably dismissed it as grief making Edward act oddly. Mary Jane Heaster was Zona's mother. Mary Jane had never trusted Edward. There was something about him, a coldness in his eyes, a darkness. She had warned Zona, but Zona wouldn't listen. Now standing over her lifeless form, Mary Jane's blood ran cold. She saw through Edward's performance, recognizing his grief as nothing more than a carefully crafted act. Her instincts screamed at her, telling her that something was terribly wrong, but she had no proof, no evidence. Desperate for answers, Mary Jane turned to her faith. She prayed for a sign, a whisper from beyond the grave, anything that would reveal the truth. Little did Mary Jane know that her prayers were about to be answered in the most unsettling way imaginable. Prepared for its final journey, the coffin was loaded onto a horse-drawn hearse. The winter wind howled through the trees, echoing the sorrow of the mourners. Zona's coffin was lowered into the cold earth. Mary Jane clung to her husband, her body racked with sobs. The sun began its slow descent, casting long, eerie shadows across the cemetery. Little did Mary Jane know her vigil was far from over. Nightfall descended, cloaking the cemetery in an eerie silence. The mourners had long since departed, leaving Mary Jane alone with her grief, her body a huddled mass against the encroaching darkness. The moon cast an ethereal glow upon the cemetery, illuminating the weathered headstones. Mary Jane noticed a change in the atmosphere. The air seemed to crackle with an unseen energy, a faint chill raising goosebumps on her arms. She sat up, her heart pounding. A swirling mist began to gather. Terror warred with curiosity within her. She watched as the mist coalesced into a recognizable form. Zona, her beloved daughter, her form translucent. Mary Jane's heart leaped into her throat as she reached out a hand, her touch sending a chill down Mary Jane's spine.
Mother.
Zona's voice echoed, each syllable laced with an otherworldly chill.
Edward did this to me.
Zona's head twisted sharply, her neck contorting at an unnatural angle. Mary Jane recoiled, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. The sight of her daughter, now a tormented spectre, sent a fresh wave of grief crashing over her. As quickly as she had appeared, Zona began to fade, her form dissolving. She whispered, her voice barely audible now, a faint echo of the daughter Mary Jane had known and loved.
Please, Mother, get justice for me.
Tears streaming down her face, her fingers brushing against the emptiness.
I promise, Zona.
She choked out, her voice thick with grief and a newfound determination.
I swear on your grave.
The ghostly chill that had permeated the air dissipated, leaving behind a lingering sense of unease. Zona was gone, returned to the ethereal realm from whence she came, but her message was clear. She'd entrusted her mother with a mission, a quest for justice. John Preston, the prosecutor for Greenbrier County, was a man of logic and reason, the supernatural, a realm he preferred to leave unexplored. When Mary Jane Heaster recounted her daughter's ghostly visitation, her unwavering conviction gave him pause, driven by a sense of duty and a nagging curiosity he couldn't quite shake. Preston decided to make some discreet inquiries. He visited the Shue homestead, his keen eyes scanning for any detail that might support Mary Jane's claims. He questioned the neighbours, his demeanour casual, yet his mind sharp, listening for any whispers, any rumours that might shed light on the true nature of Edward Shue. What he uncovered sent a chill down his spine. Edward, it seemed, was not the grieving widower he portrayed himself to be. 2 previous marriages, both ending under a cloud of suspicion, painted a picture of a man capable of darkness, a man who inspired fear rather than trust. His first wife, it was rumoured, had endured years of physical abuse before finally escaping his clutches. His second marriage, a brief and unhappy affair, ended with the sudden and unexplained death of the young bride, the circumstances hauntingly familiar, whispers of a broken neck, a hasty burial. The more Preston learned, the more uneasy he became. The pieces of the puzzle, though circumstantial, are beginning to form a disturbing picture. The thought of reopening the case of exhuming Zona Shue's body based on the testimony of a ghost filled him with a sense of trepidation. It would be a gamble, a leap of faith, one that could potentially cost him his reputation, his career, possibly even his sanity. But deep down, a quiet voice fueled by a sense of duty and a flicker of belief in the impossible. On a cold grey morning, under a sky heavy with unshed rain, the exhumation proceeded. A group of men, their faces grim, gathered around Zona's final resting place, the rhythmic thud of shovels biting into earth, the groan of wood as her coffin was lifted from the ground, a sombre symphony. Mary Jane, cloaked in a heavy shawl, stood apart from the crowd. She watched the proceedings with a stoic expression, her grief a palpable presence, a dark cloud hovering over the gathering. Was she dishonouring Zona's memory by subjecting her to this gruesome ordeal? Or was she, in her pursuit of justice, finally giving her daughter the voice she had been so cruelly denied? Zona's body lay cold and still on a table in the one-room schoolhouse, now a makeshift morgue. The air hung heavy with formaldehyde and tension, the doctor's face, his brow furrowed. As the sheet was drawn back, a collective gasp escaped the onlookers, her neck twisted at an unnatural angle. The official autopsy report, Zona's Heaster Shue's death was no tragic accident. The evidence was irrefutable. She had been murdered, her neck broken with brutal force, her last breath stolen. Edward Shue, grieving widower, the pillar of the community, was now the prime suspect in his wife's murder. At the centre of it all was Zona, a silent presence, a whisper from beyond the grave, guiding the wheels of justice, ensuring that her murderer would finally answer for his sins. The trial of Erasmus Shue commenced. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. The jury took their seats. John Preston stood ready. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as Mary Jane Heaster, her back straight, her gaze unwavering, took the stand. She was central to Preston's case, a witness to a crime that defied logic and challenged the very fabric of their reality. A hush fell over the courtroom as Mary Jane spoke, her voice gaining strength as she delved deeper into her story. Some in the audience gasped, their faces pale with fear and fascination. Others shook their heads in disbelief, their skepticism etched into their features. Mary Jane told Mr. Preston how Zona had revealed the truth to her. She had visited 3 more nights after the night in the graveyard, each time telling her a little more about what Edward had done. How Edward flew into a rage, how he grabbed her by the neck. He tried to hide it, of course. Edward dressed Zona in that dress with the high neck, covered her with a veil, tried to make it look like an accident, but Zona wouldn't let him get away with it. She came back, crossed over to the other side to make sure her voice was heard. The courtroom was eerily silent, the only sound the scratch of a pen as a court reporter struggled to keep up with Mary Jane's testimony. The courtroom, usually abuzz with activity, was eerily silent. The weight of expectation hung heavy. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the jury returned, their faces grim, their expressions unreadable. The foreman, his voice somber, read the verdict. On the charge of murder in the first degree, the jury finds the defendant guilty. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Mary Jane, tears streaming down her face, a mixture of relief and triumph washing over her, she allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Zona, her beloved daughter, had finally received justice, her voice heard. Edward Shue, sentenced to life imprisonment, died within a few years. His final days haunted, some say, by the spectre of the wife he murdered. Mary Jane Heaster, her mission accomplished, lived out her days in Greenbrier County, a figure of respect and maybe a little fear. Well, there you have it. That's the tale of the Greenbrier Ghost. If you've got any requests for topics or your own scary story, drop me an email at robbie@youshouldbescared.com or message me on my socials. I'm always lurking there like a friendly tea-filled ghost. Check the episode description for all the links. Oh, and before I go, why don't ghosts like rain? Because it dampens their spirits. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and stay tuned for more tales of the unexpected. And remember, you should be scared.